Do you, just for those who might be interested in how publishing works, do you get a sale every time there is a translation? Is there something called translation rights that accrues to you when this happens?
Well, I really got an outstanding agent, because when I sell a book to, let's say, my American publisher, they just have the rights to that book, the hardcover. In Simon Schuster's case, they own Pocketbook, so they get the paperback too.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think they get the audio. But everything else, foreign rights, movie rights, merchandising, everything else, that's all mine.
Okay.
I have different agents in other countries. I have a French agent, and an English agent, and a German agent, and an Italian agent, and so on.
So every single time it's basically a new sale and a new
Mm-hmm.
royalty structure. And
Oh, yeah.
because I have spoken to American crime writers whose European sales are significantly better
Mm-hmm.
than their American sales, and who actually, some of them survive, let's say, off their German copyright
It can
payment.
happen. I know
Royalty
that's why
payments.
we always say the movies are stupid for not really, kind of meeting my terms, because James Bond, the last one, I think grossed $330 million. Now, you can say that's enormous, but I think he grossed like maybe 120 in the United States, but the other, 210 or whatever, it was around the world. And what they don't seem to realize, Pitt is international.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always hit, the top of the list in England and Italy and Japan particularly. Japan's big on adventure. Australia. So that's what they don't realize, that Pitt is probably just as well known around the world as he is here.
Speaking of money, one of the things that I think I admire so much about you is that a great deal of the royalties for your books go to fund a foundation that you started. Can you tell us a little bit about
That's
Numa?
one of them. When the monies come in, my wife takes half, and she handles all the charity work, and she's into too many. I keep telling her, give one lump sum to one charity rather than shotgunning, but she always has to send, $200 to the wildlife, and then $200 here and so on. But most of mine goes to NUMA, which is National Underwater and Marine Agency, the same one Dirk belongs to in the books. His is government, but mine's a nonprofit foundation. And our aim is to preserve maritime heritage by finding the lost ships or aircraft, whatever, of historic significance before they're gone forever, in hopes that someday they can be raised, preserved, the artifacts put on display, that sort of thing.
How many wrecks have you so far through NUMA managed to salvage or locate, if you haven't actually salvaged them?
No, we've only salvaged a few, because we leave that up to states, governments, whatever. But we found, I guess, a little over 60.
Aren't you just back from New York, where you were looking for what? The hen? No, I'm sorry, I don't remember what it was.
We were looking for a submarine that sank in the East River, a very advanced model by John Holland, the father of the modern submarine. It sank in the East River in 1883, and we didn't find that one. But we did find up on Fire Island a ship called the Prince Maritz, which was a supply ship sent to Manhattan to Peter Stuyvesant, and it ran aground in 1657. And that was really a good find. So we're slacking off a little bit now, but we'll be back out probably in the spring. We've got about at least 3-4 projects.
I think one of the most interesting books that I've read for a long time is The Sea Hunters, which is your nonfiction book, which describes the history of several of the ships, and then the story of your locating the wrecks. Was that something that you were just dying to write?
Well, not dying. It was a labor of love, but it was just everybody kept after me. You really should record all this stuff. So I worked with a fellow named Craig Durgo, did a lot of the historical work for me. And what I did was I took the historical section, and even though the events, the characters are all real and true, I put in some dialogue. I mean, if a ship's sinking, I would assume the captain would say abandoned ship, things like that. So I tried to make it, to write the history like I would a Pitt novel, in other words, to make it interesting. And then when we can come into the picture like 100, 200 years later to search for this wreck, then to make that entertaining, I put in all the anecdotes and the goofy things that happened and all the fun we had. So as a result, it was, as far as shipwrecks go, it was kind of entertaining. I know when I researched out other shipwreck books, I found them kind of pompous and boring. And that's why I tried to make this one a fun read.
Well, it reminded me a little bit of the concept I was just mentioning about Wilbur Smith, when first he discussed the civilization and then he had the modern guys dig it up.
Yeah.
There's a very strong parallel. What I thought was especially interesting, and for some reason, I'm an historian, but I never really had focused on it, was the maritime or the naval history of the Civil War. I always think of it as basically, a land war. I think about Gettysburg and the terrible battles fought up and down, but I never really thought about the things that you write about in Sea Hunters.
Well, the numbers of just everybody involved in the casualties is why the great attraction with the land war. But the naval end of it is fascinating.
Absolutely.
Because of the technology that evolved from it. The Confederates, because they had nothing, developed mine warfare, torpedoes, submarines. It was incredible what they came up with. And the blockade, and people always think the Monitor was the only one, but it wasn't. It was just the first of its class. We found 2 monitors in Charleston that were sunk by mines. The Navy actually built, I think up until 1905, built roughly about 50 some odd monitors. 1905, yeah.
And when you say monitor, can you describe that a little bit better?
Well, the Monitor was like what they called it. The Confederates called it, like a cheese box on a raft. In other words, it was just this low-profile hull, and it was wood, ironclad, but it was like 18 inches of oak and then 4 inches of iron, and then it had a turret, which launched turret warfare, but it was in the shape of a pillbox, a round pillbox, and it revolved.
Like a tank? That sort of idea?
Yeah. And then the Confederates, because they couldn't form iron, they didn't have foundries that could do that, used railroad iron. If you take, railroad rails and reverse them, they'll fit together. So that's how they had the sloping armor. The ironclads were kind of a Neanderthal, but there again, they launched armored warfare, because when the Merrimack sank the Cumberland, which is this ship right here, the day before it fought the Monitor, that spelled the end of wooden ships as warships. And so it's a fascinating history, and I think in the book too, I did the Arkansas, which so many people, they'd always heard of the Merrimack and Tennessee and the Albemarle, but they'd never heard of the Arkansas, and this put up 10 times the battle of any of them. It fought, Admiral Porter and Admiral Farragut's combined fleets on the Mississippi. So there was a lot of fascinating stories and shipwrecks we found that just people weren't aware of.
Absolutely. Well, certainly myself. I love the one on the Mississippi. Also, I agree with you that by not only doing the story of the ship, but doing anecdotal sorts of things about it reminded me a little bit of the Bridge of San Luis Rey, the Thornton Wilder.
I haven't read that in years.
Yeah, but that idea that here you have, and there's an airplane. I'm trying to remember, but I'm sure there are many actual books, but I remember reading one also about why are all these people on this plane at this time when it's wasn't it The High and the Mighty? I think they made a movie out of it.
They made a movie out of that too.
Yeah, well, and of course it didn't crash. But anyway, I think that people are always interested in that whole idea of how, how did these people get to this place at this moment to meet their separate and corporate death?
Oh, that's true too. And like the Leopoldville last chapter, the troop transport that was torpedoed off Cherbourg at Christmas Eve, 44, 800 American GIs went down on that one. I met so many of them later. And any historic ship, there's always fascinating stories. Like the Lexington, I mentioned, this one fellow ran down to the dock, 1840, and dead of January, it was colder than hell, and he got down to the dock, and the boat was just a few feet off the dock, and he thought, should I make it or not? So he didn't, he was